topic today is clinical trial recruitment strategies for historically marginalized participants. And basically, we're looking at disparities in research and trying to build trust in recruiting minorities. As Amit said, I'm a professor, associate professor at Morehouse School of Medicine, and I don't have any disclosures related to this talk. So the objectives, we want to discuss the state of clinical trials in cardiovascular disease, and to a lesser extent, other disciplines in regards to recruitment of African-American patients, as well as Indigenous and people of color. And so that's why the next section says describe the clinical trial recruitment barriers for BIPOC populations. So that's now the sort of it term to discuss minority or historically marginalized groups of people. However, I want you to understand that, BIPOC populations are not the only underrepresented populations in clinical trials. And so that's why it's so important, as Victoria said, to discuss others such as women, elderly, LGBTQ. All of those are very underrepresented in clinical trial work. And then we want to summarize the most contemporary and effective strategies in clinical trial recruitment for BIPOC populations. And so this has, kind of slowly become my platform. We just published I think a JAMA cardiology paper and looking at sort of the recruitment strategies in underrepresented minorities and heart failure. As Amit said, I was on the ASPC paper for this in terms of diverse enrollment of in cardiovascular disease. So this is, become my go-to here. I put this picture up here because I think this is a good picture of, representation of, when we say BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we will touch base on quite a few groups, particularly American Indians as well as I kind of move forward through the talk. I want this to be interactive. I'm going to try to, breeze over some of the epidemiology stuff. You guys know this already, but I really want you guys to think of questions, and please, don't be afraid to ask once we're in the question and answer phase. So heart failure in general by race and ethnicity significantly affects younger African-American patients, higher incidence of heart failure before the age of 50. And, this is really, really interesting because I remember being in a conference, and when I was when I was a fellow and listening to someone describe the usual heart failure patient, and they described the usual ischemic heart failure patient, older, white, male, and as if that was the only heart failure that we saw. Christabel and the fellows can tell you it at Grady, and I'm sure at Parkland and LA and other places, that is not necessarily true for underrepresented populations such as African Americans. So more times than not, as they said, a higher incidence of heart failure before the age of 50, we're seeing sometimes late 30s, 40s. We lost a patient a few months ago in the midst of COVID who was 26, who came in with massive heart failure. And so it's really devastating. Every time we're on consults or, call, and you look through the list, half of it's heart failure. So it's something that's very, very important for us to note and to make sure that we try to include this population. Again, this is sort of a guide to sort of what we're seeing in terms of age-adjusted heart failure-related deaths or cardiovascular deaths. And then, as you can see, in older patients, there seems to be Black men and white men tend to be the highest. But when you compare younger patients, 35 to 64, you see significant increase in African-American males and to a lesser extent, African-American women. And this is important because a lot of times, when you're looking at Medicare data, and I just want to make this plug. So when you're looking at databases and trying to, gather racial ethnicity information and make inferences, you have to understand that a lot of patients with this disease actually don't even make it to actually Medicare. So I've seen, the reason why, it's almost like the patients that make it 65 and plus are resilient from some sort of, condition. But I think overall, it's very important to note most people die before they even get to Medicare, African Americans. So minorities, so lower than expected, we know that. The positions of National Institute of Health and the Food and Drug Administration have encouraged increased trial participation in minorities. And so they have gone through these iterations of documents and statements that basically are strongly suggestive of including minorities in clinical trial research. However, not completely required to some extent. The FDA has actually made some strong sort of brushstrokes in terms of reviewing data that's not, technically diverse. The NIH, as we said, you have to, when you're writing a grant, you have to actually make inclusions in terms of why you're not including underrepresented populations, why you're not including women. And so it's very, it's getting there. But I think, for the sake of the discussion, most of the clinical trials still are just not very diverse at all. So where are we? So this was actually a great paper. Muthu was part of this, but enrollment of older patients, women, and racial and ethnic minorities in contemporary heart failure trials. So this was a systematic review. And I really liked it because I think it sort of laid out why we need to, consider underrepresented minorities or BIPOC populations. And so this was a systematic search for heart failure trials published between 2001 to 2016. They excluded phase 1 or pilot trials, and then they also included trials with enrollment of 400 patients or more. Out of that, a total of 118 published trials actually met this criteria for review. When they compared the findings to historical data, which was conducted, included heart failure trials conducted between 1985 and 1999. The trials were divided in a number of sections. So HFrEF, HFpEF, there were trials enrolling regardless of EF. There was also a division of interventions such as medications, non-pharmacologic, pharmacologic interventions, device interventions. And then there was classified, as acute and chronic subsets, as well as funding sources. So I guess you guys are waiting for the results if you haven't seen this paper. So really fascinating. So of the 118 trials included, only 55 of the heart failure trials actually had reported information on race and ethnicity data. This is contemporary. This is in 2001 to 2016. 47% overall. And really that was about most of the people or most of the sites that did it were in the North American sections. The main age was 65 years. In trials that recorded race and ethnicity information, non-white race ethnicity constituted about 21% of the enrolled patients. So you can see why, to me, it's important to at least make that sort of cutoff, that minimum cutoff of 20% for our trials. The proportion of enrolled non-white patients in heart failure trials increased from 13% to 30% between the sections of 2001, 2004, and 2013 to 2016. So this is basically what we're seeing. However, what they found was, what was that increase all about? So there were some caveats. So there was increase in non-white race and ethnicity enrollment, but it was mainly driven by Asian enrollment, which went from 1% in the first episode section to 20% in the very latest. And so that's why the data looks as it does. Whenever you look at the data across the board and just look at white, non-white, you can say, hey, look, the populations are increasing, diversity is increasing. And it is for the Asian population. However, here's the kick here. There was a slight increase in American Indian and Alaskan Native. I always try to mention that group because I feel like that group is totally marginalized and often not talked about at all. But, there was 3% to a 9% increase over time. Enrollment for African-American patients decreased from 8% to 5%. And so again, if you take the measures of, we're doing well, we're diverse, we're enrolling people, you're going to be a little bit misguided based on this data because the data is somewhat skewed. Okay, so now we're going to look at sort of the race ethnicity in the United States and how that plays a role in what we think is appropriate for clinical trial participation. As you very well know, I think this is a little bit older slide. So the African-American population makes about 13%, the Hispanic population makes 17%, Asian population about 5%, then American Indian or Eskimo 1%, 1 or 2%, then the others are non-Hispanic white. So let's take this and look at what we're seeing now. We're seeing we're seeing the United States sort of, enrollment, the United States census population here compared to what we actually see in clinical trials participants. And this is overall. So this is not just, heart failure clinical trials. This is like a major sort of buttload of clinics. Forgive me, my mouth is a little, so. So what we see here, so compared to 68% of the entire population that Hispanics comprise of the United States, they're only part of 1% of clinical trials. African Americans are, 5% of clinical trials. And again, this is not just cardiovascular, this is cancer, this is all other clinical trials. And then most of the other clinical trials, so Caucasians make up 94%, even though they're 72% of the overall census population for North America or United States. So this is something that I think, we can't ignore, that this is something that, people honestly sort of ask, why do we care about diversity? Why is it important to increase diversity and enrollment in clinical trials? And it is largely based on the issues of generalizability, the issues of what you're actually stating that's a benefit of the medication. And it's very hard to really say that if you haven't tested it in several groups that are here in the United States, and that, we want to know kind of what's going on in terms of how they benefit from it. And this is important because, race is not, I want to make sure that you guys understand this. Race is not technically a genetic or a biologic situation here. There is very, very little genetic variation across the board when you look at, the whole genome for anybody. However, race is now more so a social construct than anything else. And so it defines where people live. It defines the number of social determinants of health, indeterminates that they have. It defines culture. It defines, the ability to live with the disease, what you think is appropriate. It defines quality of life. So all of these things are very important. And that's why race as a social construct is very important in this work. Only 15 of the 118 trials actually had information on ethnicity, which is mind blowing. The proportion of non-white race was higher in the NIH and NHLBI trials, more than any other funding mechanism. So 31 versus 20%. And so again, as I said, the NIH has long ago put out statements that said, you have to actually tell us why you're not enrolling underrepresented populations if you want this grant money. However, over time, enrollment for non-white race patients only increased in the industry-sponsored trials from 11% to 31%. So kudos, John. Kudos, for being a part of this this effort. And I think many sponsors are now seeing it is very important, even to get your drug approved. It is very important to show that you have a very diverse population. So historically in heart failure, when you look at sort of Black versus non-Black minorities, you can see for the most part, the enrollment actually clearly happens mostly by other non-Black underrepresented participants. There was HF Action, there was BEST. These were two major trials that had a significant number of African-American clinical trial enrollment, but as you can see, others are about the same, averaging about 5% or so across the board. So it's important. Oops, my mouse is very sensitive. So device therapy is different. Not half bad. With for the MADE trials, MADE 1, MADE 2, MADE 3. I'm sorry, MADE CRT. They didn't look too bad. So it's still sort of, issues out there because there are still wild disparities in atrial fibrillation care and minority management. So I think it's very important, again, to be cautious with seeing just a couple of good, trials here and there. We still have work to do. So observations and challenges. So overall, race and ethnicity reporting was poor. So the first thing that you can do is report your race and ethnicity of the participants that you have in your clinical trials. I think that has become more of a well-known, sort of traditionally understood thing to do now, particularly in the North American cohorts. You know, where race is technically necessarily not an issue in other countries, there are still class disparities as well. And so I think, as we kind of define, underrepresented populations more, it's going to be important to also sort of have that discussion of class in different countries and what that means in terms of disparities over time. So, increased relative enrollment of women and certain racial ethnicities was associated with improved clinical trial rates. So, very important. Now, sorry, I'm going to show you this. So I'm from North Carolina, and I'm from this little county here, Sampson County, extremely rural. I grew up with chickens and gardens and barefoot and just, running around with dirt roads all day long. And the reason I show you this is because this little town, actually, in terms of health ranking, was one of the last, as many of these southern counties are. And I worked in ROBESON County, which was right here. So it's sort of neighbor to Sampson County. So when I finished up a fellowship with Duke, I actually went into the community, and I was the medical director for the Duke outpatient clinic in ROBESON County. And they were attached to a hospital. And, my goal was to drive up volumes for the outpatient management, but I was interested in research. And so I said, this is a gold mine for diversity for clinical trials. And we have got to do more with community patients to increase diversity. And so I ended up, and the reason, as you can see, this was so attractive to me was because this was a very, very interesting population. So the overall, so this what you see here is the demographics of ROBESON County first. And then you see the demographics of North Carolina and then the US. And what you'll notice is ROBESON was pretty diverse. It was, about a third white people, a third Black people, and a third Native American. So the Lumbee tribe is the tribe that resides in ROBESON County, and so we have a lot of Native Americans there. And so, as I said, I went down there, and we started with one trial. Now, interesting point. So right out the gates, my first clinical trial I ran as a site PI, and it was an easy trial to enroll in. But whenever the trial was done, I was in the red. I still wasn't making any money, and I still was like, what in the world? We've enrolled more patients than anybody. So how does this, matter? Well, that becomes important when you think about your budget and you think about your community you're serving, and you think about the resources that you need to enroll the diverse population that you have. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's part of the discussion when you're talking about increasing diversity. I participated in the NIH Heart Failure Network and enrolled in a lot of those trials. Our average startup for the majority of our clinical trials when I got down there was 30 to 60 days. Now that is like lightning speed. And it's partly due to the fact that knowing sort of, what steps we needed to take when staying on top of it as a site PI, which again, I will say to you, as you guys are learning clinical trial enrollment, there is nothing better for a clinical trial site than to have an engaged site PI. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I eventually,
Dr. Echols, sorry, real quick. How do you define the startup? Is it from like proposal to first patient enroll? Like, what does that actually mean?
It's from the signing of the NDA, saying, "Hey, I want this trial," to bringing it in, to having the site visit, to first enrollment of the patient. Yep.
So that's crazy. When I was thinking about this talk, I was finding some papers, and there was a nice editorial with Deepak Bhatt that was looking at the average for startup time, and this was on the order of like 100 to 200 days for many institutions. Yeah. I mean, this is
it's not unheard of to be 6 months plus. And you know, I have been, you know, I'm in institutions. I have been in institutions where it's yes, it's not unlikely, it's not uncommon to have a 6 month. So this was well and beyond anything that I had ever done before, but I was working on this day and night. So I think that, but it can be done. That's the whole point. So you guys will know that you can, you know, speed up startup. You just have to know what you're doing, the steps that are necessary, and stay on top of it. You know, enroll. So while I was there with Duke, we enrolled over 280 patients as my tenure as a research director down there, and we completed follow-up with 99% participants. We were the highest site enrollment for a lot of the heart failure trials we completed. These were a number that we completed. And at the end of the day, I learned a lot from enrollment and working with community people who had never heard of clinical trials before, never been enrolled in them, but somehow were enrolled and did a wonderful job, followed up well, and were just wonderful patients to work with. That was my greatest joy there with ROBESON County in terms of patients, because they were so grateful, and it was such a diverse community. And so now we're getting into the ins and outs of what you need to do in terms of clinical trial enrollment. First and foremost, you need to know your clutch. And when I say know your clutch, you need to know your patient population. You need to know it like the back of your hand. So whenever a sponsor says, hey, we have a HFpEF trial here that, you know, do you think you can enroll? You already should be able to roll off your head the percentage of HFpEF people that we have, you know, or the stage of them. You just need to know it. And you don't get to know your community by sitting in an office all day writing grants, okay? So you're going to have to learn how to balance some of this. And some of it is actually getting out there, seeing the patients, you know, getting out on the floor with the coordinators and you know, looking at them enroll, being very engaging with the patients. But you just need to know the community. Takes a while, but you have to know the community. So this is a...
Dr. Echols, I have a question.
Yes. Yes.
Dr. Echols, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. You know, but one of the things I've heard, and I'm getting ready to start my own community project, is, well, what can I get from you? Like, and how do you feel like, you know, like, what are your responses typically in that? Like, you know, when you're trying to pitch it to like I'm actually about to go talk to pastors in 2 weeks about my project, and most of them know me already. So, but there's a few that don't. And so I'm like, you know, and I'm still kind of like been practicing and writing my different pitches of like how to get them to want to be part of praise. And what I'm offering to them.
So so what you're doing is community-based participant research, which is a little bit different than the clinical trial, sort of randomized clinical trial enrollment with drugs. Still very important, but it's a different skill set. And so, you know, Morehouse actually is, you know, they've been in the community for decades. And so we have a huge community health unit, and talk to me after this, and I might be able to connect you with some people who might be able to help you along with that. But basically, it is about not just kind of walking in the community saying, hey, my name is Victoria, I want to do some research on you. No, you have to start by just letting them know who you are. Go to their churches, you know, let them see you in the community, volunteer for some of the services that they're doing so that they know that you're you know, part of the community. And that's what I did with Lumberton. I spoke at churches, all kinds of churches. People saw me in the grocery store. So by the time I was done with, you know, when I bought the first trial there, it didn't matter what was going on. They were just like, did Dr. Echols said I could, he said this was right for me. Okay, that's what I want to do. So get to know your community, you know, do a little research, go to a lot of the volunteer events that they may have, and just get out there. Don't go out there with an agenda to say, this is, you know, what I want to do. Just, you know, join. You know, if there's something that you can volunteer for, people want talks all the time about education, things of that nature. Do a webinar for the elderly patients. Again, the more you are out there and non-threatening, the more people start to say, okay, hey, you know, this person understands and what they're giving me may be helpful. I might be able to, you know, get with that. Especially with churches. Churches, you know, that's a whole nother ball game. But again, you know, just let them know you're interested in the health of the community And whatever you need from me, do you need me to, give a talk about the health education? What do you want from me? What can we do to make this collaboration or this partnership work? Because at the end of the day, it's a partnership and it's about collaboration. So make sure that they know that. Okay. All right. So,
Thank you.
so yeah, no worries. So, the mental process of deciding on a clinical trial is very, very difficult when I think about it. But somehow patients go through a lot of these phases in like 10 minutes sometimes. And and you wonder, how do some people go through this so easily, and how do some people take their time and still say no? And it's really it's almost like this is like the smoking action phase, like the pre-contemplation, the contemplation, like I want to quit. I'm going to quit, but it's on the level of clinical trials. So basically, if they've never heard of a clinical trial, immediately a number of people are averse to it. They don't want to know nothing about it. They don't know nothing about it. Sorry. They don't want to know anything about it. They think you're trying to harm them. They, for a number of reasons, right? Because historically, as you guys should hopefully have all done your CD training, you understand that people actually took advantage of major populations, the Jewish community. I mean, horrible. So that's still embedded in the culture of our people, of our BIPOC people. So you have to be cognizant of that. So if somebody gives you a very averse, kind of strong visceral reaction, it's not anything that, don't take it personal. Just understand that they're in this place. And if they want more information at any time, you can give it to them. If not, that's okay. But oftentimes people have seen people either become part of studies or have gone through a study themselves, and they're okay with it. They realize that, it's about sort of this, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to benefit people with. I might be able to help somebody. And I always try to make people understand whenever I go see them, every patient that we enroll, I make them understand, my main job is to make sure that you are safe. Every single thing that we're going to be doing, we are very transparent with, but every single lab value that comes across, I'm going to look at it. Every single, issue that you have, I'm going to hear about it. So if I think that we need to be concerned about, harm or things of that nature, then that's where I take it to another level. And so I think just starting off by trying to build trust immediately, and it's hard to build that trust in like 5 minutes, right? But you have to be engaging and you have to be sincere, because patients they will sniff out fakeness and everything. And so you have to be very sincere and honest in your efforts, very genuine. Moving forward, I think, we are trying to have more reporting of race and distribution. We already talked about that. As I said, there are renewed efforts to improve minority participation. And, I think largely in part to the major things that we've seen in terms of the injustice in 2020, which were huge. But all of a sudden, it sort of brought this to the forefront, and people are now very, very interested in it. Now, however it got here, I think that it's important for us to realize that we need to take advantage of this situation and make sure that everybody understands that diversity is very important. So effective strategies. So we're going to go from the patient level to the federal level. So patient level, you can engage patient advocates or advisory boards. So Victoria, engage some of the pastors or actually even have them become a part of your advisory board. Those things, once you get leaders from the community that can actually tell you what the community, and they sometimes they don't speak for all, but they will give you a good sort of pulse of what's going on. So don't hesitate to do that. Culturally sensitive approaches. So, those words don't mean that, you have to talk a certain way or dress a certain way when you're trying to approach a patient about a child. It just means being a person and realizing that you have a human being in front of you. And this human being is wondering about this information and has questions. And no matter what question that they ask you, your job is going to make sure that you try to answer it, make them feel comfortable with what's going on. That's culturally sensitive. It has nothing to do with I could say a lot of stuff, but it has nothing to do with any of that other stuff. But just be mindful of we're all human beings and we just want to relate to each other. At the community level, you engage community practices, involve churches, barbershops. Again, the more people see you, at the little volunteer fairs and things, churches love to have doctors come speak for education service or something like that. When you offer that, you might get overused, but it'll work in your benefit in the long run. Sponsors and investigators. So this is key. And I think John and Novartis and a lot of other sponsors are figuring this out, but you have to be deliberate about your site selection. Okay. Just because you have 10 academic centers that you always go to, but these academic centers never enroll underrepresented minorities, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't give a community site that has not enrolled in a bunch of trials, but the number of trials that they've enrolled in, they've done well, they have good follow-up, but they have a plethora of diversity in their site. And so sometimes you have to kind of take a step back and say what we've been doing, where we've been going may not work. And I say that because clinical trial enrollment, when you look across globally in terms of like per month for clinical trials, I'm interested to hear what people have to say. Somebody give me a number per patient for a patient per month enrollment in a clinical trial on average. What do you think it should be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? 0.4.
Like one.
0.4. So 0.4 patients per month. When you look at averages and people spend, 2 years in clinical trials and may enroll 1 or 2 patients, that's a sign that you either as the site PI or whoever took on that trial doesn't understand the population or doesn't understand this or may sort of misinterpreted the fact that this trial would work in this community. And that's so important. So important. So remember that. Engage your research staff. I love my research staff. I engage them in everything. If there are writing opportunities, I try to, engage their interest to see what they want to do. Some people don't want to be coordinators all their lives. Some people want to go on and do different things. Some people, want to advance to other, levels of clinical research. And the more you know about that, the more you can kind of help guide that. So this is all a part of having people who stick by you and are effective enrollers. And then federal and regulatory level, you want to change the research paradigm. So, that comes with a whole lot of different things. That comes with, changing the incentive structure for actually taking on clinical trials. It's easy to say that like a site PI, if you're there, you're just enrolling in clinical trials and it can be a thankless job, right? I was enrolling in like 10 clinical trials and I was in the middle of a, highly endemic sort of cardiovascular disease population. And it just felt like nobody understood like what we were doing and how good we were doing in terms of the clinical trial enrollment and what it meant. And so it can be thankless at times, but being part of communities like this and having sponsors that are engaged, like John and Novartis, these are important things for you, because then the site PI role can turn into different things, being on steering committees, being on adjudication boards. And that's where you get the leadership. That's where you eventually get to the point where you may be a national site PI for a trial. And so those are all things that you aspire to do. Other suggestions, continue QI initiatives at site level. Again, I think this is how you get to know your population, by looking at, how does, heart failure patients do? Like what percentage of my patients are HFpEF? What's going on with the readmission? Like how does the readmission population look? What is that comprised of? All of those things give you ideas for proposals in clinical trials, and it helps you understand your population. You want strong, involved site PI leadership and understanding. Hands-on is key. And it's my bias, I'm a little OCD about it, but whenever I start a clinical trial, I have to follow the very first patient from everything. I have to see it. I'm usually training to put the information in. My coordinator is standing right by me. I'm putting in everything. I'm randomizing because I need to know what this process looks like, so that whenever he or she has a problem, I can say, oh, I've done this, or this is what I had a problem with that too. This is what we need to do to troubleshoot. because that takes time off of delays for not enrolling. Some people may feel uncomfortable because they have they don't know how to work the system. But again, you have to get people comfortable very quickly. And then the right clinical trials for the right site. Money is not always everything. It is very important with clinical trials. It helps sustain you. It helps to keep people on your side and on your staff. You have to be cognizant of that, but it still is not everything. Sometimes trials are just altruistically good for a population, and you want to see, this trial win. And so you have to kind of balance the two, and that comes with a little experience. Make sure that your team is clinically very diverse. And when I say diverse, I mean like all kinds, like, gender, race, ethnicity, as diverse as you possibly can get it. And also make sure that your clinical team has community involvement. Again, have people, engaged in the community, do little volunteer talks or do things like that. You want seamless downstream care after the trial results too. So we're talking a little bit about, after the person has completed the trial, you don't want to throw them away. You don't want to, because that person may be another participant for another clinical trial that you have. So you want to make sure that you take care of that person and you're not done with them. You want to make sure that they go straight into just as good of care as they were getting when they were in the clinical trial than when they're not. Again, provider PI visibility and approachability is key. I go see everybody. I sit down. Again, these are points for you guys. If they're in the hospital, I sit down with them. I go through the trial in my words. I sit there, wait for their questions. I look them dead in their eyes, and I use levity when I feel I need to. It's a fine balance because you're talking about people's lives, and so you have to feel them out, feel their energy. But the reason I sit there close to them is because I want to get what their energy is telling me, and that's so important. And you can also get an understanding for, you can pretty much predict who's going to be great and who's going to be, a problem child. But that shouldn't stop you from enrolling. If they're understanding the information, they're very informed in terms of consent, you just have to work harder. So a few more patients want to know the results of these trials. So do not forget that. Once you finally get the trial results a year or two down the road, go back to that patient and say, look, this trial that you were a part of, this is what it showed. Thank you for being a part of it. Again, that's another patient that you can enroll in another trial. You want to focus on patient values and non-pressure tactics. Like I said, don't stand over them, hovering around them saying, do you want holding a pen and a paper or the informed consent? Take your time. More commitment from industry sponsors to support medications for all patients. Again, if I have a trial that I'm enrolling in and this mega, expensive medication, I want to make sure that once we finish this trial, my community still has access to this population, to this medication. So whether you do it through discounts on the formulary with the hospital or however you do it, I want to see this medication used in these people that I'm treating, because, they have a right to just as well. And that goes to speak to health equity. You want, constant assessment of patient satisfaction and your clinical trial portfolio. Keep a constant pulse on everybody. I listen to phone calls. I listen to conversations that coordinators are having with the patients. I am aware of all rifts and toughs, and you just have to be that way. I do a lot of different things in the hospital every day, and wear a lot of different hats. But one of the things that gets me very, very excited is sitting here clicking on randomization and seeing this, number XYZ going to this page. I don't know what it is, but at least I've randomized yet again. That's what happened today. So that's the end of the talk. I want to say thank you guys so much. Again, Amit, I think you guys are doing some groundbreaking work with this Fit Trialist initiative. Get to know these people, get to know these faces, because in 10 years, these people will be given these talks, and these people will be the people that you're collaborating with. They will be the leaders in your trial, in clinical trial research. So again, I'm so excited. I want to make sure that I give acknowledgement to Christabel Nyange, who is my first year fellow, and she's also a sub-investigator, actual sub-investigator for paraglide. We're both paragliders. And she is phenomenal. Doesn't complain. She works hard, and I'm very pleased with what she's doing. And she's going to be one of the ones to rumble with. And finally, Sherlock. So, you know, this is when he got loose, and I was in a conference about to go on and giving a talk, and when my friend calls, I can't find the dog. And then a neighbor brings him back looking like this. And this, if you knew Sherlock, you would know he's like, oh, I'm in trouble. I lost him in 2021, August 2021, but he was with me for 13 years, amazing dog. But again, this speaks to the last part that I didn't touch on. Stay balanced, stay healthy. This is not the only thing that you'll be doing. This is not the only thing that you will do for the rest of your life. You will get married. If you're not married already, you will, you know, have balance. You will want to take care of yourself. And I speak balance to my program, my fellows. And I ask that you all think about that as well. So thank you so much for being here.